So if you have a Canon camera, should you switch to Sony? And if you're on a Sony camera, should you switch to Canon? So, BMAC, what camera do you use for your vlogs? I've been getting a lot of questions lately about the camera I'm using for my YouTube videos. And for those of you who are subscribed to the channel, you know I recently changed my main camera from Canon to Sony. And that blew a lot of people's minds because I've been a Canon fan for a very long time now. This bad boy in here, or I should say bad girl, it's my girl. This is the Canon T3i. The Canon Rebel series of cameras are phenomenal cameras. I have zero complaints about this camera in and of itself. This is the camera I used for my first, 2.5 years on YouTube. It is a great camera. I typically use either the 50mm f1.8 or more commonly the kit lens, which is the 18 to 55mm. This lens and this camera body, it was my go-to. But as you know, I recently switched to Sony. I switched to the Sony a6500, which is a camera I'm absolutely head over heels in love with, except for a few little quirks here and there, but that is not the purpose of this video. I do have my own review of the Sony a6500 on my channel, but in this video, I thought I would answer the questions why I went to the dark side and switched from Canon to Sony. Basically, my setup now for YouTube vlogs and everything I'm doing, this camera wasn't sufficient enough. It's not like this is a bad camera. This camera is a great camera if I just want to throw it on a tripod and have a setup. Set the focus, click record, and just talk. But when I started getting into YouTube vlogs, things changed a little bit. I'm gonna go over 3 main reasons why I switched from Canon to Sony, why you may or may not find yourself one day doing the same. Basically, my decision for my new camera came between the Canon 80D or the Sony a6500. The first thing is, with any camera you're gonna be using for vlogging, you need autofocus. My Canon Rebel T3i does not. Now, if you've tried vlogging before, you know if you have it on a Joby or even if you're hand holding your camera, you want that shallow depth of field, like that really professional blurry background look. You're gonna need a shallow depth of field, and that focus is gonna change even with a little bit you're moving your hand around, just like this when you're talking to the camera. And not to mention, if you wanna spin the camera around real quick and show something, your whole shot's gonna be out of focus if you have a shallow depth of field and you don't have a camera with autofocus. Now, both the Canon 80D and the Sony a6500 have autofocus, so that wasn't a deal breaker. The resolution, however, kinda was. This is where things start to get interesting. The T3i only shoots in 1080, 24, or I think 30 frames per second as well, whereas the Sony a6500 shoots in 4K and 120 frames per second 1080, which is a game changer. The Canon 80D only shoots in 1080, zero 4K on the Canon 80D. Not only do we get 4K on the Sony a6500, we also get 120 frames per second slow-mo 1080. That was incredible. Taking things one step further, let's talk about image quality. Resolution aside, 1080 versus 1080, okay? When I compared the two and looked at the footage from a Canon 80D and compared that with the Sony a6500, both in 1080 resolution, I am still continuously blown away by the quality of the Sony cameras. The image quality is just ridiculously sharp. I don't know if that's because they're mirrorless cameras or what. I can almost instantaneously tell when footage has been shot on a Sony camera because of how incredibly sharp and sexy the footage is. That's not to say the Canon 80D has bad image quality. It's just when you compare the two next to each other, I was always continuously more impressed with the Sony a6500 footage. So the reason why I switched from Canon to Sony was simply because of the lack of the features I needed at the exact same price range, or pretty close. So does that mean this Canon camera, this T3i, is trash? Might as well just throw it out the window, right? Not at all. This is still an amazing camera, and I'm gonna use it as a secondary cam. If I'm doing an unboxing video and I want that overhead shot, you best believe this is gonna be my girl to get that shot done. Also, if I'm going somewhere and I'm not traveling light and I could bring my whole setup with me, this is gonna be my time-lapse camera. Whether it be a raw photo time-lapse workflow or just straight out of the camera, just recording video and speeding it up in post, this is gonna be the camera for that. To answer the question, would I ever go back to Canon? It's not like I'm buying a new camera every year. Yes, I kind of have an addiction where I like to get the new equipment and try it out and always be on top of my game with the technology. I'm not upgrading my camera every year. This thing lasted me 2.5 years. It was pretty much outdated, maybe like in 2015, but I used it up until earlier this year and just recently upgraded to the Sony a6500, and I'm pretty sure this camera, because of how powerful it is going to last me a pretty long time. So if you have a Canon camera, should you switch to Sony? And if you're on a Sony camera, should you switch to Canon? This is all going to come down to your needs. A lot of times people ask me, oh, should I get this camera? Should I get that camera? And you'll look all over YouTube, people asking advice for what gear they should get. The answer is simple. Figure out what your needs are, figure out what your budget is, and then decide on a camera model from there. That's exactly why I switched from Canon to Sony. I needed a vlogging setup with autofocus. I really wanted to start working with 4K resolution, and I really liked the whole slow-mo concept. both of which were in the Sony 6500, not in the Canon 80D. I had a budget range that the Sony 6500 and Canon 80D fell within, and I was and still am blown away by the image quality of the Sony mirrorless cameras. Because the Sony a6500 fit all three of those needs within my budget range, it was a no-brainer why, since I was getting a new camera, I had to switch from Canon to Sony. If you want the specific details of my vlogging setup and my green screen setup when I was using this camera for the green screen, you could go to bmacadelic.com/gear or click the link below, directly below this video in the video description box. That will bring you to a list of all the equipment I use and recommend. Anything from lenses to memory cards, to camera straps, to lens wipes. You can never have enough lens wipes. It's all going to be there at bmacadelic.com/gear or in the video description box. You can click the link there as well. Now, I did hear a rumor that the Sony a6700 might be coming out soon, and I know I just said that I don't upgrade my cameras every single year, but depending on what the features are, might be time.